Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflects the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Let's get started. A few weeks ago, I was texting with a former colleague and good friend. We've worked together, built things together, and talk about leadership the way that most people talk about sports. We were riffing on a leadership move happening in our industry. We got into what the organization actually needed, not just someone who could, think about innovation. Someone who could really build the team to turn that vision into reality. And what started out as an industry conversation turned into something I couldn't stop thinking about. Somewhere in that thread between the analysis and the self-reflection, I stumbled into a framework I didn't have language for until that moment. Now, I've been in legal technology services and consulting for a long time. And I've watched organizations hire brilliantly and also hire terribly. I've seen visions die not because the idea was bad, but because the wrong person was carrying it. I've seen operationally excellent leaders plateau because they were placed in a seat that didn't match their wiring. And I've seen companies thrive not because they found one perfect leader, but because they understood which seats were empty and deliberately filled them. So today, I want to talk about the 4 seats. The 4 seats archetypes, what they are, how to identify which one you're actually in, and why the most dangerous mistake in leadership isn't sitting in the wrong seat. It's not knowing you're in it. So let's talk about seat number 1, the dreamer. So the dreamer is the purest form of visionary leadership. This person has the grandest ideas, the most compelling narratives, the ability to see a future that no one else can yet see and to talk about it in a way that makes people want to follow this person. The dreamer's superpower is inspiration. Their shadow side, and every archetype has one, by the way, is that inspiration without architecture is just optimism with good branding. The dreamer doesn't think in seats. They don't ask which roles are empty because they assume the energy of the vision that they have will just fill the gaps. They hire people who validate the vision rather than people who carry what the vision can't. And when things don't execute, which they don't sometimes, the dreamer often concludes the vision wasn't communicated clearly enough. So they communicate again, but this time much louder. I have watched brilliant dreamers talk their organizations into momentum, only for that momentum to stall because nobody built the operational infrastructure to sustain it. The vision was not the problem. It was the self-awareness that was the problem. And here's the hard part. Most dreamers think they are sitting in seat number 2. So let's talk about that. Seat 2 is the architect visionary. So the architect visionary carries the same fuel as the dreamer. The vision is real. The direction is clear. The ability to see around corners and translate market need into organizational direction, it is genuine. But the architect visionary has one thing the dreamer does not. They know what they are, and importantly, they know what they are not. So before I took on my current role at the advisory firm, I had a vision for building a service line that didn't exist within the firm. I could see exactly what it needed to be. I could see the market need, the client pain, and the gap that nobody was filling, and I was certain about the direction. But the thing was I was nervous about the execution. And I want to be honest about that nervousness for a second because I think it is the most important part of this entire story. I didn't walk in with a polished plan born from confidence. I turned to trusted frameworks such as the 4 disciplines of execution, objectives and key results methodology, and the 12-week year methodology. I didn't go back to these frameworks because I was 100% certain of exactly what I needed to do, but rather because I knew that to combat imposter syndrome, this is what I needed to do to starve off that feeling. And if you've spent any time with this show, you know I've talked about imposter syndrome before. But what I haven't said before is this: the imposter feeling and the architect behavior happened at the same time. I was rereading the methodology books and doubting myself at the same time. And those two things are not in conflict. The doubt was the reason for the methodology. I knew I needed a structural container for my vision, or it would stay a vision, like the dreamer. And that's the architect visionary move, not the absence of fear, the presence of a plan despite the fear. I also knew something else. I knew that I cast wide. I'm the keynote speaker, not the panel speaker. I run 3 podcasts. I travel. I spray value across every room and platform I can reach because that's my orientation to the world. I generate. I communicate. I build relationships broadly, and I let the vision do the work of attracting the right people. I also knew that broad orientation meant I wasn't a fit for one of the most critical seats on my team. I needed someone who goes deep, someone who owns a handful of relationships and drives the majority of their revenue from that focused attention. Someone who understands the heart and soul of a client in a way that requires sustained presence and not broadcast strategy. In other words, I needed to hire my complement and not my clone. And that is the defining move of the architect visionary. You don't hire people who make you feel validated. You just don't. You hire people who carry what you cannot. And within 30 seconds of my first conversation with the person I eventually brought on to help me run sales, my gut told me she was the one. She told me she had 3 clients she could bring with her if I hired her. And you know what? She did. She has what I don't. She focuses deep where I cast wide. She builds the kind of relationships that drive sustained revenue from a concentrated base of trust. Now, look, that's not to say that I don't have those types of relationships as well, but I knew enough to know what was needed was both of us with our distinct approaches to attack the market. My love of educating massive rooms of people is where I shine the brightest, and she doesn't want that life and doesn't need it. She executes. She understands clients in a way I actually admire and don't replicate. And so I want to be really clear about this important point. Hiring her didn't happen because I lacked confidence at all. Quite the contrary, actually. I did so because I was honest with myself. And that's the important part to remember. That's architect visionary thinking applied to the highest stakes decision a leader can make. Now, that's not all though. Let's talk about seat number 3, the kernel. So the kernel doesn't originate the vision. And that's not a limitation, by the way. That's actually the whole point. The kernel is operationally brilliant in a way that most visionaries, dreamers, and architects alike are not wired to be. The kernel understands the numbers, the market mechanics, the team dynamics, and the specific sequence of decisions that turn a compelling direction into a functioning organization. The kernel assembles the right people, removes the roadblocks, and builds what the architect designed. Early in my career, I worked for someone I'll call my colonel. He gave me the best onboarding experience I've ever had. He taught me the technical foundation of the work we were doing, the bits and the bytes, the mechanics of a product I was going to be selling at a depth that nobody else had bothered to give me. And he didn't have to do that. He chose to. And then he stepped back and he watched me run. What he gave me wasn't just knowledge, it was credibility. With his operational foundation underneath my visionary instincts, I could sell the vision of what the product could do in a way that resonated because it was grounded. I wasn't selling air, I was selling something I understood at the level of the person who built it, even though I wasn't the person who built it. That's the Colonel at their best. Not just executing the vision, but identifying the person around them who can carry it forward and deliberately investing in building their foundation. Here's what organizations miss about the Colonel. They often promote colonels into visionary roles because colonels are so competent. They're so indispensable. They're so clearly excellent that the organization assumes they should lead at the top. And sometimes it does work. But often it doesn't, because the colonel's genius lies in making a vision operational, not in generating it. Promoting a colonel to a visionary seat doesn't create a better colonel. It creates a frustrated executive and an empty seat that nobody actually knows is missing. So let's talk about the last seat, seat number 4, the executor. The executor is where the rubber meets the road. This is the person who builds and delivers, not generates, not operationalizes, not translates, builds, delivers. The executor doesn't need to own the why. They need to own the how, completely, reliably, and with a level of focus that the visionary and the colonel often cannot sustain because their attention is always being pulled toward the horizon or the organizational layer above them. The executor needs 2 things to thrive: clarity and trust. Give them clear direction, the authority to carry it out independently, and an excellent executor will consistently outperform expectations. Micromanage them or leave them without a clear framework, and you will lose them, either physically or psychologically. Now, the person that I brought in to help me run sales for my service line is an executor in the most complimentary sense of that word. She executes at a level I cannot match in her lane. But she's also grown way beyond the original seat, which is worth naming because great executors often develop colonel instincts over time. The seats are not ceilings. They are really just starting points. So now I have a mirror question for you. And here's where I want to leave you. Look, most leadership conversations ask this question: what kind of leader are you? But I want to ask something sharper. Which seat are you actually in? Not which seat do you want to be in, not which seat your title implies, and not which seat you describe yourself as sitting in at a dinner party. Which seat are you actually in? When the pressure is on, the decisions are real, and the gap between your vision and your execution becomes visible. And then the harder question: does your organization know which seats are empty? Because the most common leadership failure I've observed is not incompetence. It's really misplacement. Dreamers in architect seats wondering why nothing executes. Colonels in visionary roles wondering why they feel creatively suffocated. And executors with no colonel above them running hard in a direction nobody has clearly defined. It's setting you up for failure. The 4 seats framework that I developed doesn't tell you which seat is best, to be clear. There is no best seat, and every seat is critical. Every empty seat costs the organization something it can't easily measure until it's already lost. What this framework does is give you the language to have an honest conversation, first with yourself and then with your team, about who is sitting where and whether the right people are in the right seats. I reread through all of those methodology books like the 4 Disciplines of Execution and Objectives and Key Results in the 12-week year before walking into my new firm to prepare as much as I possibly could. But I also read them because somewhere beneath the imposter syndrome was a very, very clear-eyed understanding of exactly which seat I was in and exactly which seats I needed to fill once I walked in day 1. And that self-awareness wasn't confidence. It was honesty. And in my experience, honesty about what you are and what you are not is the foundation of every functional leadership team. The dreamer thinks that they are in seat 2, and the architect visionary knows which seat they are actually in. So I'll leave you with this question. Again, which one are you? And while you think about that, Remember, leadership isn't about perfection. It is about progress. Take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. I'll see you all next time.